Right, okay, it's quick bite time again, and in this video we are looking at pole float selection. Quite often you find yourselves, what I've got here in my hand, a big selection of floats, and picking the right one for the right situation really does increase your catch rate. I didn't believe it many years ago, but when you get into it and you really start using the right float for what you're trying to achieve, trust me, you catch a lot more. So in this video it's going to be quite a big information dump all in one go. I'm going to try and simplify it as much as I can, but if I say anything that you don't understand or if I miss anything, please just drop me a comment and I will personally answer them to try and make things a bit more clearer. So let's start off with probably my favorite style of pole floats. Now we're talking about here fishing in open water where there's many different scenarios. I try and simplify it as much as I can. So we'll break the pole floats down into components, I guess is probably the easiest way that I could do it. So you've got two in my hand here. I've got a carbon stem and I've got a wire stem. Okay, very, very different. A carbon stem lets you fish through the water. So if you're loose feeding, perhaps 4mm pellets, maggots, stuff like that, and you want to catch fish as your bait's falling down through the water, then a carbon stem is so important because it will stay uncocked until your shot take it all the way to the bottom, so you can see any little dinks on the way as your float moves down. Whereas a wire stem pretty much self-cocking, so as it goes in straight cocked, you've got loads of loose line and you can't see what's happening. So that is the difference between your stems. If you're fishing through the water, use a carbon stem. If you're going to use heavier baits like corn or big pellets, you just want to get a bait straight down, hold it stable in some wind, then you want to be using a wire stem. So that's stem sorted. The next thing is the actual float body shapes. Now, pretty much for me, it's like the rugby ball size. That's what I use for 95% of my fishing. Very, very odd scenarios where I use a bigger round bodied, if it's really deep or really windy, but you're getting very, very specialist there. And that's perhaps one of the ones that you can find me a question on if you want more information on it. But a rugby style shape is the one I use. Now, they come in very different sizes, okay? So the matrix floats that I use are actually labelled in 0.1 gram, so 0.1, 0.2, 0.3. If you want to know a good size what to use, then I would use 0.1 gram of a float per foot of water. So if you're fishing in 2 foot of water, 0.2 gram of a float, 3 foot of water, 0.3 gram of a float. So that's how you pick the size. Slightly different if your floats are labelled 4x12, 4x14, but there is another formula for that, is you use the last number of the float selection. So if you've got a 4x12, 2 to 3 foot of water, 4x14, 4 to 5 foot of water, 4x16, 6, 7 foot of water. What I'll do, because that's quite complicated, I'll put a couple of graphics up on the screen and explain the size of the float that would be ideal for the depth of the water, and hopefully that will clarify any of those up. We then move on to bristles of pole floats. Now, obviously in various colours, I pretty much only use orange because I think they're the best in every light condition, but you can get yellow, you can get black. If you want something in white water, black might be the option, but for this, orange is very good. Now, the only other thing about bristles is the thickness. Now, you can get thicker bristles and thinner bristles, and they make a huge difference. So, for example, this carbon stem here, a finesse wire, it's got a finesse carbon, sorry, it's got a really thin bristle, and it will allow me to see really, really delicate bites from F1s or something like that. So fishing in the winter, I'd use a real tiny, delicate bristle because it's going to let me see those smaller feeding reactions. On the flip side of that, I've got a slim wire here. The bristle is actually much thicker. So if I'm fishing in the summer, trying to catch loads of fish, don't want to be striking at line bites, then I would use a thicker bristle. So there's lots to think about, and that's just taken in consideration. These floats are for fishing in open water, but if you marry it up to what you're trying to do, so fishing through the water, fishing on the bottom, trying to see bites, time of year, depth of water, all stuff like that, trust me, it's going to make a big difference. The only other ones worth mentioning, there's obviously loads of different variations of floats. So another very, very popular style of fishing is shallow fishing. These are my two shallow floats. So I use the Dibber, which is this little one here. That will be used for anything under, let's say, 18 inches when you're fishing really shallow, trying to be really aggressive with it, lots of feeding. You're not trying to read the float or get any liners or anything like that. For anything, like I said, 18 inches smaller, basically a little dibber is the way forward. And the other shallow one I use is actually it's labelled on the side, it's an F1 shallow. It's got a little bit of a bristle, so I can fish it slightly deeper. And if I want to try and find the depth of the fish, I can see, you know, the bristle dipping up and down. I can see if fish are swimming into line and giving me liners. So a bristle just lets me read a little bit more about it when I'm fishing shallow compared to what a dibber was. So that's those. Cannot go in a float selection without talking about a margin float. I've actually got this one rigged up because hopefully I'm going to catch a few down the edge shortly, but I've got a power margin float on. Now in a margin float, a huge thing you're looking for is a very stable float with a big bristle. You get a lot of fish down there, normally very big. They can create lots of water movement. You don't need to be delicate. You want something that's stable with a big bristle that lets you to properly get a bite when that bristle shoots under. That's actually got a fiberglass stem in it. It's a sort of in between a carbon and a wire, but the stem's pretty irrelevant. If you're fishing down the edge, you want a big bristle and a stable float. And one of the only other floats I actually use, this one's also on a rig, is a little mudline float. Now these are really condensed down margin floats, let's say. They've got a bit of a rounder body and they're really nice and short. So if you're fishing really shallow water, up against islands, mud banks, what they say on there, then these are great because they're nice and short, but again, very stable, thick bristle. When you get lots of fish in shallow water, it's really, really important. So like I said, you know, I've got a big selection. This is only a very small selection I brought with me today, but you can see that if you were just putting on a random float thinking it doesn't matter, it's just going to go under, trust me, get it right in the right situation. Float choice is going to make a big difference to your catch rate. So I hope I haven't confused it. I hope I've put some clarity into what I use. There's obviously loads of special situations like paste fishing and all sorts of stuff like that where you can get paste floats, but most of them do say on them, certainly in the matrix range, as I've got them here, they actually say on them what they're used for. So slim powers for the deck, shallows, margin, they literally say on the float what it would be designed for. So there you go, that's a little bit of a rundown of pole floats. Get out there and use the correct float, and like I said, it will definitely increase your catch rate.